I never thought my wedding day would turn out like this. But here I am, standing in the corner of my own reception, watching my new in-laws make a spectacle of themselves. Let me take you back to the beginning. I'm Sarah, and I've always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding. You know the kind: white dress, flowers everywhere, and being surrounded by loved ones. When I met Jack, I thought I'd found my Prince Charming. He was kind, funny, and we just clicked. After 2 years of dating, he proposed, and I was over the moon. But there was one tiny problem: his parents. From day one, Jack's mom and dad made it clear they didn't think I was good enough for their precious son. They'd make snide comments about my job as a teacher, saying things like, "Oh, that's such a noble profession. It's a shame it doesn't pay well." Or they'd criticize my appearance, suggesting I should put in more effort when we visited them. I tried to brush it off. I told myself they'd come around eventually. After all, I was marrying their son, right? They'd have to accept me sooner or later. Boy, was I wrong. As we started planning the wedding, things got worse. They insisted on inviting all their friends and business associates, turning our intimate celebration into a networking event. They vetoed my choice of venue, saying it wasn't upscale enough. And don't even get me started on the guest list drama. But I bit my tongue. I wanted to keep the peace for Jack's sake. He was caught in the middle, trying to please both me and his parents. I could see the stress wearing on him, and I didn't want to add to it. Finally, the big day arrived. I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and dread. As I slipped into my dress, which, by the way, my future mother-in-law had deemed too simple, I tried to focus on the positive. In just a few hours, I'd be married to the man I loved. The ceremony went smoothly. Jack looked handsome in his tux, and when we said our vows, I felt like maybe everything would be okay after all. Then came the reception. As we entered the ballroom, I noticed Jack's parents huddled with a group of guests I didn't recognize. They were whispering and glancing in my direction. A knot formed in my stomach. What were they up to? I didn't have to wait long to find out. As Jack and I made our way around the room, greeting guests, I overheard his mother's voice, loud and clear. "Oh yes, that's her," she said, pointing right at me. "She'll be serving us tonight." I froze. Did I hear that right? Surely, she couldn't mean... But then his father chimed in with a laugh. "That's right. We figured if she wants to be part of this family, she might as well make herself useful." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I realized what was happening. My own in-laws were telling guests that I, the bride, would be waiting on them at my own wedding reception. As I stood there, stunned, I caught Jack's eye across the room. He looked confused, then alarmed as he saw the expression on my face. He started making his way towards me, but I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. Little did my in-laws know, but their cruel joke was about to backfire in a way they never saw coming. I stood there, frozen in shock, as the reality of what my in-laws had done sank in. My dream wedding had turned into a nightmare in a matter of seconds, but something inside me snapped. I was done being the doormat, done trying to please people who clearly had no respect for me. As Jack approached, concern etched on his face, I made a split-second decision. I grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of our guests. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Jack asked, his voice laced with worry. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your parents just told everyone I'd be serving them tonight. At our wedding reception." Jack's face went from confused to angry in an instant. "They did what?" I nodded, feeling a mix of hurt and rage bubbling up inside me. "I heard them, Jack. They were laughing about it." For a moment, Jack looked like he didn't know what to say. Then he squared his shoulders. "I'll talk to them. This is unacceptable." But I shook my head. "No, Jack. I'm done. I've put up with their behavior for 2 years, hoping they'd come around. But this is the last straw." Jack's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm saying it's time I stood up for myself. And if you're really on my side, you'll stand with me." There was a moment of silence between us. I could see the conflict in Jack's eyes. He loved me, but he'd always struggled to confront his parents. This was the moment of truth. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. This ends now." Relief washed over me. For the first time that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. We walked back into the reception hall hand in hand. I could feel eyes on us, curious whispers floating through the air. Jack's parents were still holding court with their friends, champagne glasses in hand, looking smug. As we approached, Jack's mother's fake smile faltered. "There you are. We were just telling everyone." "We know what you were telling everyone, Mom," Jack interrupted, his voice firm. "And it stops now." His father tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, son. It was just a little joke." But Jack wasn't backing down. "A joke? Humiliating my wife on our wedding day is a joke to you?" The guests around us fell silent, watching the drama unfold. I squeezed Jack's hand, giving him strength. "Now listen here," his father started, but I cut him off. "No, you listen," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I have tried for 2 years to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I've endured your criticism, your snide comments, and your attempts to control our wedding. But I'm done." I turned to address the stunned guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not here to serve anyone. I'm here to celebrate my marriage to the man I love." Then I looked straight at my in-laws. "And if you can't be happy for us and treat me with respect, then you can leave. Now." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jack's parents stood there, mouths agape, clearly not used to being challenged. Jack stepped forward. "You heard her. Either apologize and behave, or leave. Your choice." For a moment, I thought they might actually apologize. But then Jack's mother's face hardened. "Well, I never. Come on, Harold. We don't have to stand for this." As they stormed towards the exit, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to Jack, worried about how he was feeling, but he surprised me by breaking into a wide grin. "That," he said, pulling me close, "was incredible. I'm so proud of you." As we faced our guests, I realized this was a turning point. Our wedding might not have gone as planned, but it was the start of something even better. A marriage where we stood united, ready to face whatever came our way. Little did I know, the drama was far from over. As the door slammed behind my in-laws, a hush fell over the reception hall. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, a mix of shock, curiosity, and, was that admiration? Jack and I stood there, hand in hand, facing our guests. For a moment, I panicked. Had we just ruined our own wedding? But then, something unexpected happened. Slow clapping started from the back of the room. It was my best friend, Lisa, a grin spreading across her face. Soon, others joined in. Before I knew it, the whole room was applauding. Jack's cousin Mike approached us, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's about time someone stood up to Aunt Karen and Uncle Harold," he said. "They've been bullying people for years." As the initial shock wore off, our guests started to relax. The DJ, sensing the mood, put on an upbeat song. Slowly but surely, the party began to come back to life. Jack turned to me, his eyes shining. "I'm so sorry about all this, Sarah. I should have stood up to them long ago." I squeezed his hand. "We did it together. That's what matters." As we made our rounds, thanking people for coming, I was touched by how many guests expressed their support. Even some of Jack's parents' friends approached us, apologizing for the scene. "We had no idea they were so awful to you," one elderly lady told me. "You handled it with such grace." The night went on, and despite the drama, it turned into a celebration filled with love and laughter. As Jack and I swayed to our first dance, I felt like we could conquer anything together. But just as I was starting to relax and enjoy myself, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first, but it kept vibrating insistently. Finally, during a break between songs, I checked it. My stomach dropped. 15 missed calls from Jack's sister, Emily, and a text that made my blood run cold. "OMG, Sarah. I'm so sorry. Mom and Dad got into an accident on their way home. They're in the hospital. It's bad. Call me as..." I showed the message to Jack, watching the color drain from his face. In an instant, our world turned upside down again. "We have to go," Jack said, his voice shaky. I nodded, already moving to gather our things. As much as his parents had hurt me, I wouldn't wish harm on them. And I knew Jack must be terrified. We quickly explained the situation to our wedding planner and a few close friends. They promised to handle everything and send our guests home with our apologies. As we rushed out of our own reception, still in our wedding attire, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Just an hour ago, I'd told Jack's parents to leave. Now, we were the ones running out. The drive to the hospital was tense. Jack gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I placed a hand on his arm, trying to offer comfort. "It'll be okay," I said, even though I had no way of knowing if that was true. As we pulled into the hospital parking lot, I took a deep breath. I didn't know what awaited us inside, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next would test our new marriage in ways we never could have imagined. Little did I know, the biggest challenge was yet to come. We rushed into the emergency room, a bizarre sight in our wedding attire. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow on my white dress, now wrinkled from the car ride. Jack's bow tie hung loose around his neck. Emily met us at the entrance, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "They're in surgery," she said, her voice trembling. "The doctors say it's touch and go." Jack's face paled even further. I squeezed his hand, trying to offer some comfort. As we settled into the waiting room, the reality of the situation started to sink in. Just hours ago, we were celebrating our wedding. Now, we were praying for Jack's parents to survive. The next few hours were a blur of coffee runs, hushed conversations, and anxious glances at the clock. I called our wedding planner to check on things at the reception. She assured me everything was taken care of, but I barely registered her words. Finally, around 3 a.m., a tired-looking doctor approached us. "Family of Karen and Harold Thompson?" We all stood up, hearts pounding. "They're stable," the doctor said, and I felt Jack sag with relief beside me. "But they're not out of the woods yet. Your father has a severe concussion and some internal bleeding. Your mother has a broken arm and several fractured ribs. They'll both need to stay in the ICU for a while." As the doctor explained the extent of their injuries and the road to recovery ahead, I found myself in a daze. Part of me was relieved they were alive, but another part couldn't help but remember their cruel words from earlier. When the doctor left, Emily turned to us, her face tear-stained but determined. "You guys should go home and rest. I'll stay here tonight." Jack shook his head. "I can't leave them." I looked at my new husband, saw the conflict in his eyes, and made a decision. "Why don't you stay, and I'll go home to get us some clothes and essentials. We can't stay in our wedding outfits forever." He nodded gratefully, and I headed out, my wedding dress rustling as I walked through the quiet hospital corridors. As I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I was exhausted, worried about Jack's parents, and still angry about what they'd done. But most of all, I was sad. This wasn't how our wedding night was supposed to end. When I got home, I quickly packed a bag with comfortable clothes for both of us. As I was about to leave, I noticed our wedding gifts piled in the living room. Amid the shiny wrapping paper and bows, there was an envelope with Jack's parents' handwriting. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a check for a substantial amount of money and a note. "Dear Jack and Sarah, we know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but we want you to have a good start in your married life. Use this as you see fit. Love, Mom and Dad." I stared at the note, feeling a lump form in my throat. Had they been trying to make amends? Or was this just another attempt to control us with money? As I drove back to the hospital, the sun was just starting to rise, casting a golden glow over the city. I realized that this was the beginning of our married life, for better or for worse. We'd already faced more in one day than some couples do in years. Walking back into the hospital, still in my wedding dress but now carrying a duffel bag of everyday clothes, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jack and I would face them together. Little did I know, the biggest test of our new marriage was just around the corner. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and fitful naps in uncomfortable chairs. Jack barely left his parents' side, and I stayed right there with him, determined to be the supportive wife I'd vowed to be. On the fourth day, as I was dozing in a chair by Harold's bed, I heard a groan. My eyes snapped open to see Jack's father stirring, his eyes fluttering. "Jack!" I called out, my heart racing. "I think he's waking up." Jack rushed in from the hallway where he'd been talking to the doctors. We watched with bated breath as Harold's eyes slowly opened, confusion evident on his face. Where am I?" he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You're in the hospital, Dad," Jack said gently. "You and Mom were in a car accident." Harold's eyes widened as memory seemed to flood back. Then, to my shock, they filled with tears. "The wedding," he whispered. "Oh God, what have we done?" I stood there, frozen, as Harold turned his gaze to me. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. We were, we were horrible to you." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to accept his apology immediately, to let bygones be bygones. But another part, the part that still stung from their cruel words, held back. Jack squeezed my hand, offering silent support. Harold continued, his words coming out in a rush now. "We were wrong. So wrong. We thought we were protecting Jack. But we were just being selfish and cruel." Tears were flowing freely down his cheeks now. "Can you ever forgive us?" I felt my own eyes well up. I don't know," I said honestly. "What you did really hurt me." Harold nodded, closing his eyes briefly. "I understand. We don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know, I want to do better. Be better. If you'll give me the chance." Just then, a nurse came in to check on Harold. As she fussed over him, I stepped out into the hallway, needing a moment to process what had just happened. Jack followed me out. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I took a deep breath. "I think so. It's just a lot to take in." He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "I know. And whatever you decide, I'm with you. We're in this together." As we stood there in the sterile hospital hallway, I realized we were at a crossroads. Could we forgive Jack's parents? Should we? And even if we did, could we ever truly move past what had happened? I thought about the note we'd found with their wedding gift. Had they already been feeling remorseful before the accident? Or had the brush with death changed their perspective? Just then, Emily rushed up to us. "Mom's awake," she exclaimed, "and she's asking for you both." Jack and I exchanged a look. This was it. Whatever happened next would shape the future of our family. As we walked towards Karen's room, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope. I didn't know what awaited us, but I knew that Jack and I would face it together. Little did I know, Karen's reaction would throw us yet another curveball. As we entered Karen's room, the beeping of machines filled the air. Jack's mother looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, a far cry from the imposing figure she'd been at our wedding. When she saw us, her eyes widened. "Jack, Sarah," she said, her voice weak but clear. "You're here." Jack moved to her bedside, taking her hand. "Of course we're here, Mom. How are you feeling?" Karen's eyes flitted between us, landing on me. I braced myself, unsure what to expect. "I'm sorry," she said, and for a moment, I felt a wave of relief. But then she continued, "I'm sorry you had to see us like this. It must have ruined your honeymoon plans." I felt my jaw drop. Was she serious? After everything that had happened, this was what she was sorry for? Jack squeezed her hand. "Mom, that's not important right now. We're just glad you and Dad are okay." Karen nodded, then turned her attention fully to me. "Sarah, dear, I hope you're not too upset about what happened at the wedding. You know how these things can get out of hand." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My disbelief must have shown on my face because Karen's expression hardened. "Now, don't look at me like that," she said, her tone becoming defensive. "We were just trying to have a bit of fun. You're far too sensitive." Something inside me snapped. All the hurt, anger, and frustration I'd been holding back came rushing to the surface. "Fun?" I said, my voice trembling. "You call humiliating me in front of all our guests fun? You told everyone I would be serving them. At my own wedding." Karen had the audacity to roll her eyes. "Oh, please. It was just a joke. I can't believe you're still upset about that." I felt Jack tense beside me, but before he could speak, I continued, "It wasn't a joke to me. It was cruel and hurtful. And it's not just about the wedding. It's about how you've treated me from day one. You've criticized everything about me, my job, my appearance, my family. I've tried so hard to please you, but nothing is ever good enough. Karen's face flushed with anger. Well, if you can't take a little criticism, maybe you're not cut out to be part of this family after all. The room fell silent. I felt like I'd been slapped. Jack finally found his voice. Mom, that's enough, he said, his tone firm. Sarah is my wife now. She is part of this family, whether you like it or not. Karen looked at Jack in shock, clearly not used to him standing up to her. Jack, surely you can see Dash. No, Mom, Jack interrupted. I see perfectly clearly. I see that you and Dad have been terrible to the woman I love. And it stops now. He turned to me, his eyes full of determination. Sarah, I think we should go. We've said what we needed to say. As we turned to leave, Karen called out, Jack, wait. You can't just leave like this. We're your parents. Jack paused at the door, looking back at his mother. Yes, you are. And I love you. But I love Sarah too. And I won't let anyone hurt her, not even you. With that, we walked out of the room, leaving a stunned Karen behind us. In the hallway, I let out a shaky breath. Jack, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause a scene. He pulled me into a hug. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. And I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. As we held each other in that sterile hospital corridor, I realized that this was a turning point. We'd stood united against the storm, but the question remained. Where do we go from here? Little did we know, the answer would come from an unexpected source. As Jack and I stood in the hallway, still reeling from the confrontation with his mother, we heard footsteps approaching. We turned to see Jack's father, Harold, shuffling towards us in a hospital gown, leaning heavily on an enforced stand. Dad, Jack exclaimed, rushing to support him. You shouldn't be out of bed. Harold waved off his concern. I heard everything, he said, his voice gravelly. I couldn't just lie there. I tensed, preparing myself for another battle. But Harold's next words caught me completely off guard. Sarah, he said, looking directly at me, I want to apologize. Truly apologize. I blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. Harold continued, his words coming out in a rush. What we did at the wedding was inexcusable. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. We've been treating you poorly from the start, and there's no justification for it. He paused, taking a shaky breath. When we had that accident, do you know what I thought about? It wasn't our business or our social status. It was Jack and you. I realized how close we came to never seeing our son again, to never having the chance to make things right with you. Tears were forming in Harold's eyes now. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm truly, deeply sorry for everything. And if you'll give me the chance, I want to do better. Be better. I stood there, stunned. This was the last thing I had expected. I looked at Jack, who seemed equally shocked. Dad, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Harold shook his head. You don't have to say anything, son. I'm the one who needs to make amends. He turned back to me. Sarah, I know it might take time, but I hope someday you can forgive us. And I promise you, things will be different from now on. I felt tears welling up in my own eyes. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, to put all this behind us. But another part, the part that still stung from years of subtle jabs and outright insults, held back. I appreciate your apology, Harold, I said carefully. It means a lot to hear you say these things. But you're right, it might take some time. We can't just pretend the past didn't happen. Harold nodded solemnly. I understand, and I'm willing to put in the work, for however long it takes. Just then, a nurse came rushing down the hallway. Mr. Thompson, you shouldn't be out of bed. Come on, let's get you back to your room. As the nurse led Harold away, he looked back at us. I meant what I said. Things will be different. I promise. Jack and I watched as his father disappeared around the corner. We stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Finally, Jack spoke. Well, that was unexpected. I finished for him. He nodded, then turned to me. What do you think? Do you believe him? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I want to. I really do. But I'm scared to get my hopes up, you know? Jack pulled me into a hug. I know. And whatever you decide, I'm with you. We're in this together, remember? As we stood there in the hospital hallway, I realized that we were at another crossroads. Could we trust Harold's change of heart? And what about Karen, who still seemed unrepentant? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, Jack and I would face it as a team. Little did we know, the next challenge was already on its way, and it would test our newfound unity in ways we never imagined. The next few days were a whirlwind of hospital visits, hushed conversations, and sleepless nights. Harold continued to show remorse, making small but meaningful gestures whenever we visited. He asked about my job, listened attentively when I spoke, and even defended me when Karen made a snide comment about my outfit one day. Karen, on the other hand, remained cold and distant. She barely acknowledged my presence, speaking only to Jack when we were in the room. The tension was palpable, and I could see it wearing on Jack. One afternoon, as we were leaving the hospital, Jack's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and frowned. "It's Emily," he said. "She wants us to meet her at the house." I felt a knot form in my stomach. We hadn't been back to Jack's childhood home since the wedding day disaster. Did she say why? Jack shook his head. "Just that it's important." As we drove to the house, my mind raced with possibilities. Had something happened to Harold or Karen? Was Emily going to confront us about the hospital drama? When we arrived, Emily was waiting on the porch. Her expression was unreadable as she led us inside. "I've been doing some thinking," she said as we settled in the living room, "and some digging." She pulled out a dusty photo album from behind her back. "I found this in the attic. I think you both need to see it." As she opened the album, I gasped. The first photo was of a young woman who looked remarkably like me. She was smiling, her arm around a younger version of Harold. "That's our Aunt Sarah," Emily explained. "Dad's sister." Jack leaned in, his brow furrowed. "I didn't know Dad had a sister." Emily nodded. "That's because they don't talk about her. She was disowned by our grandparents when she married someone they didn't approve of. A teacher, actually." I felt a chill run down my spine. The parallels were uncanny. Dad was devastated, Emily continued. They were really close, but he didn't stand up for her, and they lost touch. I think that's why they've been so hard on you, Sarah. You remind them of her, and of their biggest regret." The room fell silent as Jack and I absorbed this information. It didn't excuse their behavior, but it shed new light on their actions. "There's more," Emily said, pulling out an envelope. "I found this in Mom's desk. It's a letter from Aunt Sarah, dated just a few months ago. She's been trying to reconnect." Jack took the letter, his hands shaking slightly as he read it aloud. It was a heartfelt plea for reconciliation, expressing regret for the years of estrangement and a desire to be part of the family again. As Jack finished reading, I noticed tears in his eyes. "They never told us about this," he said quietly. Emily shook her head. "I think they were afraid. Afraid of facing their past mistakes, afraid of change." I sat there, stunned. This revelation put everything in a new perspective. It didn't erase the hurt they'd caused, but it helped me understand where it might have come from. "What do we do now?" I asked, looking between Jack and Emily. Emily smiled softly. "Well, that's why I called you here. I have an idea, but I'll need your help. Both of you." As she outlined her plan, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope. It was risky, but if it worked, it could be the key to healing not just our relationship with Jack's parents, but old family wounds as well. Little did we know, this plan would set in motion a series of events that would change all of our lives forever. Emily's plan was both simple and terrifying. Invite Aunt Sarah to the hospital to reunite with her brother. The timing was crucial. Harold was still recovering, which meant he couldn't easily avoid the confrontation. And perhaps, in his vulnerable state, he might be more open to reconciliation. We spent the next day preparing. Jack was a bundle of nerves, alternating between excitement at the prospect of meeting his long-lost aunt and anxiety about how his parents would react. I focused on the practical aspects, helping Emily arrange the visit and preparing a small gathering in the hospital's family room. The day arrived, and I found myself pacing outside Harold's room. Jack had gone in to prepare his father for the visit, while Emily had gone to meet Aunt Sarah at the hospital entrance. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see Emily walking alongside a woman who could have been my slightly older doppelganger. Aunt Sarah's eyes met mine, and she stopped in her tracks. "You must be Sarah," she said, her voice warm. "I've heard so much about you." Before I could respond, the door to Harold's room opened. Jack emerged, looking pale but determined. "He's ready," he said quietly. We all took a deep breath and entered the room. Harold was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of his sister for the first time in decades. Karen, who had been sitting by his bedside, looked like she had seen a ghost. "Hello, Harry," Aunt Sarah said softly, using a nickname I'd never heard before. Harold's lip trembled. "Sarah? Is it really you?" What happened next was like watching a dam break. Years of pent-up emotion came flooding out as brother and sister embraced, both crying openly. Karen sat frozen, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and what looked like shame. As Harold and Aunt Sarah talked, catching up on years of lost time, I noticed Karen slip out of the room. I hesitated for a moment, then followed her. I found her in the family room we had prepared, staring out the window. "Karen?" I said softly. She turned, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "I suppose you think this is some kind of victory," she said, her voice lacking its usual bite. I shook my head. "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about family." Karen laughed bitterly. "Family? What do you know about our family?" "I know that it's been broken for a long time," I said gently. "And I know that it doesn't have to stay that way." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she started to speak. She told me about the day Sarah left, about how it tore Harold apart, how she had encouraged him to cut ties, thinking it would help him move on, how the guilt had eaten at both of them over the years. "When I saw you with Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it was like seeing Sarah all over again. I was so afraid of losing him the way Harold lost his sister." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Karen, you haven't lost Jack, and you don't have to lose me either. We can start over, build something new, if you're willing to try." She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. I think I'd like that," she said hesitantly. As we stood there, an understanding passing between us, I realized that this was the real turning point. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt like we were all heading in the same direction. Little did I know, the biggest surprise was yet to come. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Harold and Aunt Sarah spent hours catching up, their laughter often echoing down the hospital corridors. Karen, true to her word, made visible efforts to connect with me, asking about my work and even apologizing for her behavior at the wedding. As Harold's discharge date approached, we all gathered in his hospital room to discuss the future. The atmosphere was charged with nervous energy. We'd made progress, but we were all acutely aware of how fragile this newfound peace was. "So," Harold began, looking around at all of us, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the past, about the future, and about what really matters." He reached out and took Karen's hand. "Karen and I have talked, and we've made a decision. We're going to sell the house." Jack and I exchanged surprised glances. The family home had been a point of pride for Harold and Karen for as long as Jack could remember. "We want to downsize," Karen explained, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Get a place that's more welcoming. A fresh start." Harold nodded. "And we'd like to use some of the money from the sale to do something important." He turned to Jack and me. "We want to set up a scholarship fund for aspiring teachers." I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was a beautiful gesture, one that acknowledged both my profession and the mistakes of the past. "That's not all," Karen added, looking directly at me. "Sarah, I owe you a proper wedding reception. One where you're the guest of honor, not the well, you know." I was speechless. Jack squeezed him,